Greetings, family. Good morning. Welcome to African Esquire TV on the We Charge Colonialism TV channel. First of all, can you all hear me well? I have a new mic I've been testing out. So if you cannot hear me, you can let me know. If something needs to change, I can do that early on. But good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well wherever you are. We have a lot of things to talk about today. I'm sure many of you have been keeping abreast of what's going on over in Mali. And we're going to talk about this. So if you don't know, I was actually supposed to record last week. I've been under the weather. I'm still like my throat's a little not too perfect. So if you see me sucking a cough drop or drinking tea, it's because I'm still recovering. But I'm actually happy that I was not able to record. Sounds perfect. Thank you. I'm actually happy I wasn't able to record last week because a lot more developments have happened with Mali, and it actually relates directly to the topic that I wanted to talk about. That is when we talk about a new world order, which we're going to get into. What place does Africa have inside of that? You know, we're so conditioned to thinking that the colonial system is two separate systems operating inside of the world. But we have to understand the African continent at this point has been occupied completely by colonial interests. And because of that, the African continent now has been brought into a system, a global system. We call it globalism. Some people call it globalism. And because of that, you know, African people are a part of something that many of us have not consented to. So this idea that you vote for your politician and your politician is going to represent you on an international stage separate and apart from what you would expect to happen on the global stage. No, your politician is not representing you. They're actually representing their puppeteers, their colonial puppeteers. And so because of that, we really can't afford to not know what's going on inside of the international arena, because constantly over inside of that sphere, we're being brought into conversations that we're not privy to. We're being brought into decisions being made that we're not privy to. And because of that, African people are not being represented by governments that are really for their interests. It's really for the interest of a global system. So we're going to talk about that in light of Mali, because a lot of things have happened that I think show directly that the global system will punish any African nation that steps out of compliance with their order. We've seen this many times before. We've seen this with Gaddafi. We've seen this with so many revolutionaries, Sankara and Nkrumah. We've seen this with so many people. Whenever they step out of the order, they are quickly brought into it. So we're going to get into that today. First, if you don't know, I want to let you know that the former president, the ousted president of Mali, Ibrahim Keita, has passed away at the age of 76. This actually happened on the 16th. And a lot of people inside of the globalist system are sharing their condolences, despite the fact that Keita was very corrupt, despite the fact that he outwardly supported Francophone presence inside of Mali. Still, the globalist puppets, such as people like Nana Akufo-Addo, who extended condolences to the people of Mali, and the people of Mali are the ones who ousted him. The people of Mali were protesting, saying, we don't want you to be our leader. You have to step down. And you're offering them condolences. It's almost as if you're pretending as if you don't know what this person actually represented. That's what you see a lot inside of global politics. A lot of pretending. It's a lot of ignoring the voices of the people and pretending like the only voice that matters is the voice of, again, the globalists. And that's how the system's able to operate, because the media backs it. You know, the media will be the voice for the globalists, and the media is not supposed to be separate from them, but it's actually a part of them. And then the politicians are a part of it. And then the corporations are a part of it. So if everyone who has power is saying one narrative, and yet the majority of the people who are powerless inside of the system are saying something different, it doesn't matter what the majority say. It's really what this small group of people are saying. And that is how they maintain their power. That's how they also are able to manipulate many of us psychologically, because I'm sure if any of you know, if you say something repeatedly, if you think about like not to compare us to this, but when you're training like a pet, whether it's a dog, if you do something repeatedly, eventually the people are going to believe what you're telling them. So if you keep saying things like, globalism is good. If you keep saying capitalism is good, if you keep saying this repeatedly inside of the minds of the people, maybe not the first generation, maybe not even the generation after that, but eventually it will become normalized and it'll be like de facto, it'll be a fact. Like, oh, of course capitalism is good. What else is there? And that's kind of where we are today. If you think about African people, when we're trying to talk about what we want to see Africa look like, when someone suggests anything other than a status quo, it's like, well, what do you mean? What does that look like? How could that be the case? We've never seen anything like that, despite the fact that Africa has a long history of not being capitalist prior to encountering the European presence, and has a long history of communalism. All of a sudden, it's wiped from the memory of in the subconscious of the people. So that's the same thing what Nana Akufo-Addo is doing, despite the fact that people on the ground in Mali have said that that was not our leader. He's congratulating, or not congratulating them, offering his condolences to them as if it was still their leader. And over time, it might be forgotten that the people of Mali have risen up against this person. So that's one thing I wanted to start with. We're going to go into a story that was put out last week about what's happening in Mali. Because right now there's essentially a face-off between Mali and the Ecowas. And of course, the Ecowas are the regional bloc in West Africa, which is comprised of a number of West African nations. Notably, it is now being ran by Nana Akufo-Addo. And I want to just point that out because a lot of our people love Nana Akufo-Addo because of what he says, but we don't question what he does. And believe it or not, he's the one championing what is happening, the sanctioning of the people of Mali. Sanctions don't really affect the leadership, we should all know. It really affects the people. So Nana Akufo-Addo is sanctioning the people of Mali because they did not want a foreign puppet inside of their country representing them as the president. So I'm reading from this article. It says, the West African nations sever links with Mali over an election delay. Okay, West African nations will close their borders with Mali, sever diplomatic ties, and impose tough economic sanctions in response to its unacceptable delay in holding elections following a 2020 military coup. Emphasize this again. We mentioned this on the podcast and book club. 2020 was the coup, right? And they all suddenly want you to have a democracy 1 year after having a coup. This is unrealistic. It's not just unrealistic. If they were to have an election right after deposing a president, right, that would completely thwart every single shedding of blood that people suffered, all of the organizing, all of the work. It would completely thwart everything because election right after a coup is basically saying, let's go right back to normal. Any people who were true about revolution would not do that. The American Revolution in the United States of America, this supposedly ultra democratic country, right, didn't happen until 12 years after the first election in America did not happen until 12 years after their quote unquote revolution against the British. And we know that was kind of a transfer of power among the elites. But even they waited 12 years because they had to get their constitution intact to make sure that they're securing rights for the people who they want to have rights and make sure that they're securing power for the people that they want to have power. So what sense would it make for Mali, the Malians, to 1 year after getting rid of Keita, because they did not want French neocolonialism in their country. And France is still there as a military presence, but I believe they're slowly leaving. What sense would it make if that was the mandate? We don't want neocolonialism. We want representative government of the African people of Mali to have an election right after. That would essentially be saying, okay, we're going to keep the same master. We're going to keep the same structures in place. This is the big thing, because a lot of us are trying to reform structures that were literally written and created by the neocolonialists. So think about it. In the system of colonialism, whenever people were quote unquote decolonizing, because we know that it became neocolonialism, but when they said they were decolonizing and the countries were many times negotiating with their former colonizers, the former colonizers were oftentimes the ones who wrote the constitutions. So if your former colonizer wrote the Constitution, then that means that they're writing their power being solidified even into the future. That's a problem. So when you have a revolution or a coup, whatever, common sense would say you get rid of the constitution, it was written by your oppressor. You get rid of the people who were in charge. You get rid of the colonial relationships. So that cannot realistically happen in 1 year. But that's actually by design, because the fact is that ECOWAS do not want a Mali that's revolutionary. They do not want a Mali that is separate and apart from the global system. They want one that is in compliance, because none of them are revolutionary. All of them are in compliance with the global system. All of them answer to the United Nations. So of course, having a rogue state next to them, or two rogue states, because also Guinea, right, is also been sanctioned by the ECOWAS because they also had a coup. Having these rogue nations in their midst is basically jeopardizing their relationship with Mesta. That's a reality of what people are dealing with. So we're going to read on. The fresh measures from the economic communities of West African states represent a significant hardening of its stance towards Mali, towards whose interim authorities have proposed holding elections in December 2025 instead of February as originally agreed by the bloc. In a communication issued after an emergency summit in the Ghanaian capital of Accra, the ECOWAS said it found the proposed timetable for a transition back to constitutional rule totally unacceptable. This schedule simply means that an illegitimate military transition government will take the Malian people hostage. Now, this is funny, and I'm going to show you why, because really, it's not the Malian people being held hostage. The people in Mali are backing this military junta. I'm not backing them. I don't know much about them, but the people in Mali apparently do. And they apparently would much rather have these people be the ones who usher in their liberation or their transition to liberation than under the French neo-colonial puppets. But they're branding this. Remember what I said at the beginning? Like, they'll repeat something over and over again. This is how the media works. Like, they'll keep saying, oh, Gaddafi, he's killing his people. Gaddafi's committing genocide. Gaddafi's doing this. Gaddafi's doing that. And over time, inside of the minds of the people who are ill-informed, they believe these things. So they're saying that, oh, this military junta, they're barbaric. They're holding these people hostage over and over again to try to reinforce this message in the minds of the people who are ill-informed of the fact. But clearly the people of Mali have made a decision. We're not being held hostage. This is actually a relationship that we feel comfortable with. Now, I want to see if I can find a sanction. So it says the organization said it has agreed to impose additional sanctions with immediate effect. These included the closure of members' lands and air borders of Mali, the suspension of non-essential financial transactions, the freezing of Malian state assets in the ECOWAS commercial banks, and recalling their ambassador, Bamako. Meanwhile, Regional Monetary Union instructed all financial institutions under its umbrella to suspend Mali with immediate effect, severing the country's access to regional financial markets. So this is very severe actions. This is severe actions you would never see these people take against the Western powers. You would never see them take this against any Chinese powers. You would not see them take these actions against anyone but their own people. And this is probably the worst part of it, is the self-hatred aspect of it all. You're going to isolate your people, knowing, again, that these sanctions are going to hurt people. Like, if these continue, unless some divine intervention, many people will starve. Many people will suffer. Many people will be thrust into poverty. So the ECOWAS, led by Nana Akufo-Addo, they're punishing the people of Mali for daring to want a representative government. They're punishing them. And this is the type of self-hatred that exists inside of African politics. They feel comfortable doing this to their own people, but they would never do this to anyone else. They would never do this to an Arab nation. They would never. The only way that they would do it, if they were under the direct authorization or order of a Western power that told them, you need to do this and act accordingly. But that rarely even happens. So this is the reality of what's happening. Now, you might say, why are they trying so hard to punish Mali like this? Well, as I said, they're taking orders from people. They're always taking orders. So we have to remember, being a puppet means that you have a puppeteer, right? You can't be a puppet without a puppeteer. And in this case, the United Nations is the ones who are really calling the shots. The United Nations, of course, is dominated. The United Nations is really dominated by mostly the United States, but also their Security Council is really where the power lies. But overwhelmingly, the United Nations leans to the Western globalists, and although they have to make room for people like Russia and China because they're such powerful countries, so they're now trying to change their tune with them. But overall, the United Nations is representative of the Western governments. So what do I mean by the United Nations is the one calling the shots? Let me show you another article where you can kind of see just the goal of how these people operate. So it says, the UN's Gutierrez says, it's essential that Mali presents an acceptable election calendar. The 1 year is an election calendar that is acceptable. Saying we need 5 years to get our constitution together and to reorganize our country, that's not acceptable to the United Nations. UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez said on Thursday that it was essential for Mali's transitional government to present an acceptable electoral calendar, which would lead to the gradual easing of sanctions on the West African nation. Now, this is interesting because the United Nations, as of now, has not yet sanctioned Mali. The sanctions have happened from the Ecowas. Even the African Union, they're leaning towards sanctioning, but really the Ecowas are the ones who have outwardly sanctioned them. But the United Nations is saying, well, if you want to get these sanctions off of you, we're gonna have to see an acceptable calendar. That lets you know right there, the Ecowas are not coming up with this on their own. They're doing this under the direction of the United Nations. The United Nations is saying, hey, if you don't want these sanctions on you from the Ecowas, you need to basically fall in line with the global New World Order. Now, oh gosh, I actually lost this article. It looks like I've reached my limit. So I'm gonna post this in the description though, because it's a really good article. This is how these newspapers are getting us nowadays, because they'll let you view it once, and then if you go back, they'll shut it down. So maybe you all are able to view it. But yeah, so essentially the United Nations was the one calling the shots when it comes to the ECOWAS. And we've seen this many times before. The United Nations will pretend to be in the background and they'll let their little henchmen do the work for them. And this is what's happening essentially right now inside of the country of Mali. Now, I wanted to show you all that this is not really what's happening as far as like, oh, the people are being held hostage by this military junta. Again, I don't know enough about them. I'm sure unless any of us are in Mali, none of us know enough about them. But as far as what we see from the people, they have the support of the people, and they have the support of the people in the wake of the previous administration not having the support of the people. So the people are politically conscious. They've made a deliberate decision. We do not want Ibrahim Keita, who's now passed away and deceased. We do not want him to represent us. We want a new form of representation. And they have heard this military junta, and they say, this is the form that we want. I'm going to play a video that shows just the support that the people have for this military junta as it stands. Okay, so this is a rally happening right now in Mali.
Not just the lyrics of a song, but an anthem to Mali's M5 protest movement, celebrating 1 year of demonstrations that led to the toppling of former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita by the military junta. Some hold signs saying death to France and their allies. Others hold the portrait of Mali's new strongman, junta leader Assimi Goïta. Last week, he orchestrated a second coup, detaining the prime minister and president of the transition government.
Oh, I got the wrong video again. Guys, I am not on my game. I had a video. Let me look it up. I had a video of the actual rallies that are happening right now inside of Mali. Let me look that up. But even back then, you could see that even the second coup, where they tried to make it seem like this second coup was something that was done against the Malian people. Here we go. The people have been absolutely supporting them. So let me share my screen again. Okay, here we go.
In Mali, a large protest was witnessed Friday in support of the ruling junta, as they also demonstrate against the stringent sanctions imposed by the West African bloc Ecowas over delayed elections. The protests were witnessed in several Malian towns, including Bamako, Kadiolo, and Buguni, located in the southern region of the Western African country.
So you see right here, the people are protesting. Someone had a sign that said "Death to France," "Mort to France," I think is what it said. clearly people are identifying that this is not a matter of trying to just comply with the Ecowas. It's also trying to comply with your former colonial masters, who are the ones who have determined what destiny that they want for the people of Mali.
Leaders of the Economic Community of the West African State agreed to sanction Mali last week, imposing a trade embargo and shutting borders in a decision later backed by France, the United States, and the European Union. The junta cast the sanctions as extreme and inhumane and called for demonstrations. Strongman Colonel Assimi Goïta, who first took power in a coup in August 2020,
now, I also want to point out something that they said it was very essential. And you see also, by the way, this is like a broad breadth of people in Mali. You have people who are Muslim, people who are not Muslim, like different people from different walks of life who are all coming together to say, no, we're not okay with this. But I also want to point out what they just said, that so I actually didn't pull this article, but there's an article that talks about the European Union is giving, playing a good game. They're saying we don't want to separate the people. We don't want to isolate Mali. We actually don't want that to happen. So we're going to try to work with Mali. But the actual sanctions by the Ecowas, again, are being sponsored or supported by the European Union and US. So these people are very slick and still keeping the same tactics. If you think about historically, it's always been a blackface that has been used as the one who's the tyrant, right? They put a blackface, but really they won't be the ones whispering in their ear, be the ones paying them, be the ones propping them up. So while the European Union has been saying one thing, oh, we want to work with Mali, at the same time, they're the ones that are pushing and sponsoring that, or pushing the ECOWAS to actually do this to their own brothers and sisters. So clearly there is a world agenda that we have to know what's going on. So this is going to transition us to the topic that I want to talk about, because this issue with Mali, you have to ask as an African person, why, how could it be that you would feel so much angst against a neighboring country? Your brothers and your sisters, they're no different than you. If you were to see a Malian, if you were to see a Ghanaian, most of us wouldn't be able to tell one of them apart. A Malayan, a Nigerian, we wouldn't be able to tell them apart. They're all Africans, right? And they're specifically from the same region of Africa. So what is it that would turn you against your own brothers and sisters? The answer is that, again, as I started off the video saying, there is a global system that has to remain in compliance. And we see this constantly as a theme throughout international law. Now, I know when I say New World Order, some of us automatically probably thinking like, uh-oh, Tierney, you're going down a rabbit hole. But I'm actually going to show you that this is not just some conspiratorial idea that, some right-wing person came up with. Like, there's well-documented planning that has happened since the end of World War II, and even using of that phrase, it was not invented by anyone who was criticizing it. It was invented by the people who created the order. And now, actually, I'm going to play a video later on. They call it more now like the liberal world order to try to make it sound better. But the issue is that it's an idea that the world is uniformly operating to the benefit of a few people. Every single country is included, and the ones that will not comply are the ones that must be punished. So think about the countries who have been punished by the world. Just listing the countries as of now, you have Cuba being punished, Zimbabwe being punished, you have North Korea being punished. These are the countries that are like under constant scrutiny, constant sanctioning, constant everything, right? And the reason why is because these countries at some point in their history, and some now more than before, have chosen to not comply with this order. And that's how they ensure that we're going to go back and fall in line, because they all have their agenda. So we're going to talk about this in depth. We're going to talk about some things that are happening as far as what's happening over in Davos. If you don't know, right now, the World Economic Forum is meeting right now. And we're going to just get into more details. This is probably, again, going to be things that we're going to talk about over weeks because it's such a huge topic. So we're just going to take this incrementally, and hopefully we can all learn together about what's happening in this world around us. Before I get to the breakdown of the New World Order and how it relates to us as African people, I do want to go through some news. So now we're going to talk about news that's happening right now in the African. Hey everyone, all right. So let's talk about a little more about Haiti. If you didn't see in the podcast and book club, WCC podcast and book club, we talked about Haiti briefly. I did want to just talk more and give a little bit more details about what's happening over there, because essentially we have direct information that proves that the United States was directly involved in the assassination of Jovenel Moise. And I see now another article is trying to play games with me. So I think it's working now. All right, so let me share my screen and we can talk a little bit about this. So new revelations in the assassination of Haitian president point to conspiracy of high-ranking government officials. So again, if you haven't heard, there's new revelations that last July's assassination of the president, we know he was not the rightful president of Haiti, but he called himself the president, and so did the his Western masters. So their president, we'll say, Jovenel Moise, that add to the evidence that the plot was orchestrated by powerful political figures within the Moise cabinet representing rival sections of the country's corrupt elite and backed by U.S. authorities. Following the execution of Moise at the hands of gunmen who broke into his residence, recently appointed Prime Minister and longtime U.S. stooge Ariel Henry was tapped as the new head of the government by the so-called core group, foreign diplomats from North America and Europe, including the U.S. ambassador to Haiti, along with representatives from the United Nations and the Organization of American States. Henry was handpicked after a brief power grab by acting Prime Minister Claude Joseph. Henry's predecessor was shot down by Washington and its allies. Henry and other Haitian authorities overseeing the murder, the investigation have concocted an official narrative attributing the killing to some 40 suspects, including Moise's security officers, several native businessmen, and Haitian Americans, as well as 18 Colombian mercenaries who have been arrested for carrying out the assault on Moise's residence. Although the investigation has been ongoing for several months, and more than half of those accused in the murder plot were arrested immediately following assassination, little to nothing has been revealed from high-ranking officials on who exactly ordered the president's killing and what figures financed the directed plot. So, this is something that many people called it. I was not sure. I'll say that. I was like, okay, this is what it seems like. And initially, when I hear of assassination in any African country, I'm like, it's the U.S. But after I did a interview, if you remember, Brother Kwaku Lumumba, he brought up some good facts about the fact that Jovenel Moise also had enemies. So I was waiting to see more about what happened and try to get some more information, before I, went with that narrative, because if the guy had enemies, the guy had enemies. But the interesting thing is that what happened to Jovenel Moise is something that happens to many African puppets whenever they are no longer in the interest of their masters. That is that you are disposable. And that's something that I think when you look at how quickly the Ecowas are racing to isolate Mali, they understand they're disposable too. And when you're disposable, that means the people who put you in power can easily take you out. Now they assassinated him. Some people would just, be basically ousted. Some people would just be subject to a coup. But they decided to assassinate him for whatever reason. So this is something that it's definitely something we have to scrutinize. And although we understand Jovenel Moise was, in fact, a colonial puppet and he was not in the interest of the Haitian people, we also have to keep in mind that his replacement is also a colonial puppet. And when they identify a better colonial puppet, when they use that person to basically prop them up, that's something that's going to have ramifications for the Haitian people. So let's keep the pressure on the United States and their European allies who are still punishing the people of Haiti for declaring that they will be liberated from the enslavement of these powers. Let's keep the pressure on them. Let's keep our solidarity with the people of Haiti. And let's also continue to support different organizations. If you recall, the organization KOSSA, K-O-S-S-A, that was one that's on the ground, the one that Brother Kwaku Lumumba represents. So I would encourage you to search them, K-O-S-S-A. Look them up, and if you want to support an on-the-ground Haitian organization, you can look them up on their website. Thank you so much, Amujale. Peace and power to my brothers and sisters in the chat. Black power, absolutely. Thank you for your contribution to WCC. So let's go to the next story. This one, I really was like, it's tragic. So many African people in the United States will get will prop themselves up through crises that our people face. But whenever it's time to hold people to task for their role in it, they're like nowhere to be found. The Flint water crisis is one example. So this is an article on the Real News. I'll post it in the description after I read it. Why did a Democratic AG kill the Flint water RICO case? That's you right. You heard it. A Democrat in the United States, and I'm not going to assume everyone pays attention to U.S. politics, and we have other African brothers and sisters throughout the diaspora. So if you don't know, the Democrats are the party who basically always pretend to love Black people. The Republicans are the ones who don't pretend to love Black people. There's Black people who belong to both parties, but Democrats usually carry the Black vote. And the party that pretended to love Black people has once again shown that they are lying out the side of their neck, because these parties are really the same. That's the one thing that has to be emphasized. They have different types of ways, different agendas sometimes, but overall, their devotion is to the maintenance of order. Their devotion is to the maintenance of the white supremacist order in the United States. And so both of them really are the same, just some know how to dress it up better and maybe throw a few bones to African people in the United States. So this is interesting. Prosecutors investigating Flint's contaminated water crisis. This is when lead was inside of so much other pollutants too, not just lead, the side of the water of the people of Flint, poisoning them. Many children having health and mental defects just because of this government deciding that they're going to change the water source to one that they knew was contaminated. So they were pursuing a racketeering case against public officials whose austerity-driven policies caused the health catastrophe. But after newly elected Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel took over office in 2019, those charges were dropped. You heard it. After the Democrat, newly elected Attorney General was elected, the charges were dropped. That's according to investigative journalist Jordan Sheraton and Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Charlie LaDuff, explosive news story. So they said the Flint water crisis began nearly 8 years ago when an unelected emergency manager appointed by then Governor Rick Snyder, a Republican, made cost-cutting decision to switch the city's tap water source from Detroit's municipal supply to the Flint River, whose highly corrosive water caused aging pipes to leak lead into thousands of homes. From 2016, 2008 to 2018, prosecutors working under Michigan's Republican Attorney General Bill Schuette were reportedly preparing to use a federal anti-organized crime statute, the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, against the state and city officials. Okay, a Republican AG was preparing to go after the same city officials who poisoned the people in Flint. A Republican was preparing to do that. And essentially, those investigators were dismissed and the probe resumed under a new team. The RICO case never materialized. And environmental justice defender Monica Lewis Patrick said that the water warriors need to know why Nessel dropped the RICO charges in the Flint water crisis. I think we all need to know why the charges were dropped, why it is that the people of Flint have not been compensated. I mean, you've literally destroyed the prospects of thousands of children just because, well, I believe, these things are intentional. Some might say that it was just them trying to be cheap. But I believe you don't make those types of decisions unless you're constantly saying, okay, these are people who are undesirable, so let's just do this as a way to sneakily diminish their life potential. And so these children are devastated. The families are devastated. The adults are devastated too. And they have not found any type of way in their hearts to say, hey, not only did we do wrong, we're actually going to find a way to do right by the people. We're going to find a way to actually go after the officials who allow this genocidal act to occur. No, instead, you get a Democrat in office who's going to basically face no scrutiny, because I'm sure a bunch of our people were saying, oh, this person's going to be good for us, and the governor that appointed her is going to be good. I'm sure that Black vote was behind this administration, yet this attorney general completely erased any potential for the people of Flint to get justice. This is what happens commonly inside of internal colonial politics inside of the United States. This is why I will never again vote for a Democrat. You heard me right now. Never, ever. As you're affiliated with that party, or a Republican, but if you're affiliated with either of those parties, to me, you do not devote. You do not deserve that vote, period. And I think we should all take a similar stance, because you have to understand, when you're part of a party, it's not just you representing their platforms. They have to accept, they recognize you as in their party. That means that you're part of the machine. That means you're part of the political machine. You're part of the decisions that are being made, even in Washington. It's not just your local party. So you're aligning yourself with a white supremacist institution. And I feel like we have to get really serious inside of the African community in America and completely just reject either of those parties and say that, you know what, we're going to have enough self-love for once, that we're going to not throw our vote behind them. And if there's no one else who is going to step up, no alternative party who we feel like we want to align ourselves with, then hey, we'll hold our votes rather than throw it away to wolves and foxes who are going to just deceive us and going to come back to us 4 years from now or 2 years from now, whatever the term limits, and have a new story as far as like what they're going to do differently this time. They never do differently. So let's keep this in mind. We have another contribution. Thank you from Matt Dollars. Thank you for your contribution to WCC. All right, so we have one more story that we're going to go through. This one, some of you might think is kind of silly, but this is something that came out that basically with Twitter, they have lifted the ban of the Nigerian government. So first, let me say, if you don't know, before the Twitter even lifted the ban on the Nigerian let me rephrase that. So Twitter lifted the ban from the Nigerian government, and in return, Nigeria lifted the ban on Twitter. But we're going to actually focus on Nigeria lifting the ban as opposed to focus on Twitter lifting a ban. So Nigerian government suspended Twitter on June 4th after it removed a post from President Muhammadu Buhari that threatened to punish regional secessionists. Nigeria will lift the ban on Twitter from midnight after social media platform agreed to open a local office, among other agreements with authorities in a West African country. So I never thought that Twitter was going to let that money go. When it comes to them having a beef with Buhari, I believe Buhari was actually banned, if I'm not mistaken. If he wasn't banned, he was suspended from Twitter. But I didn't think they were going to let that money go. Nigeria is a huge population in Africa. And as I said, and actually let me plug it right here, everyone, if you could go to wechargecolonialism.org, and I can also post the link here actually, you will see an article I just wrote called Data Colonies. I think it's a really important article to read, because what you see is Africa in particular is being looked at as, we all know it's the next frontier, but as far as the digital space, this is where they're going to really solidify their hold and on the grip on the African people inside of the digital aspect. And Twitter, of course, is a big social media giant. Twitter was funneling money to on the ground groups inside of Nigeria who were opposing the Buhari administration. And I'm sure there's a reason why. Like, I don't know that Twitter randomly just picked a beef with Buhari. It could be, I speculate in the article, it could be that maybe they wanted to experiment and see what happens if we're going to actually pick the groups that we want to be the faces of a movement. So there was a lot of groups, for example, who were previously organizing in the NSARS protest movement, and yet only a few groups who were more civil society oriented were picked out of all those other ones. And those ones had fewer followers and fewer presence on the ground, yet they became the faces of the movement. So it could have been an experiment, but it could also be that Buhari did something, behind the scenes. Maybe he rejected some type of deal with Twitter. So Twitter wanted him out of power. So, excuse me, still recovering from this cold. So yes, it says Nigerian government suspended Twitter on, just so we went through that. Telecoms companies subsequently blocked access to users in Nigeria. Twitter has agreed to act with a respectful acknowledgement of Nigerian laws and a national culture. Sorry, excuse me. The company will work with federal government and a broader industry to develop a code of conduct in line with the global best practices applicable in almost all developed countries. So that's what's being promised now. we should know that Twitter is not our friend. We should know none of these social media giants are our friend. And so let me actually find the article before we switch gears, so you can read it yourself and see like what's being planned as far as the digital space. Okay, so the article is Data Colonies. I'm posting it right now. Okay, so you all read it, please. Let me know your feedback. Hit me up. If you did not follow me on Telegram, that's the best way to actually hit me up directly, because I really don't check my social media all like that anymore. So please go to Telegram. The link to that is in the description, and that's where I update more usually. So with that, we're going to switch gears and get back to the topic at hand, and that is the Africa inside of the New World Order. Okay, so let's go over to the AUMD Declaration. If you all don't know, we created a declaration in a coalition of Pan-Africanist organizations. I'm sure you must know by now, but I believe the link should also be in the description for that. And let me share a page of it with you, because it talks about something that came about in the post-World War II era. So let me see if I can zoom in. So this is page 8 through 9 of the Declaration, I believe. Yeah, page 8. So we talk about how neocolonialism is the predominant form of colonialism today. Now, it says the system of neocolonialism was put in place when every colonized African country was still formally colonized, okay? Following World War I and the creation of the League of Nations, Western colonists saw the need to formulate a legal justification for maintaining influence and power over their colonial possessions. This became known as the mandate system. Now, the mandate system is important to understand because essentially the mandate system exists today. We don't call it the mandate system anymore. We call it the trusteeship system. But that is the idea that we're going to transition formerly colonized countries into being a part of a global order. If you think about what has happened, that's exactly what they've tried to do. They've tried to usher us into being a part of their order. But of course, in this order, we have no autonomy and we don't get to live by the principles or by our own best interests of the people. It's about the best interest of the colonists. So we switch pages. The relationships were called trusteeships, and they were used to justify foreign control of indigenous peoples. Natural resources, for example, were not treated as belonging to indigenous populations, but to the larger international community. The mandate system was replaced by the trusteeship system. I just said that. In 1945, this is following the end of World War II. Through the trusteeship system, the United Nations administered the decolonization of former mandate countries, okay? True decolonization, however, had already been thwarted a year prior in 1944 when Western imperialist countries formulated what became known as the Bretton Woods Agreement. This agreement effectively ushered in a new world order with a centralized monetary system that required independent countries to comply with the rules set by the West. So when I say new world order, we're not talking about white racist conspiracy or conspiracy at all, right? This is something that was actually cemented and created. The idea was that as we move away from former colonialism, we have to invent a new world system. This system is going to replace the old one, and it's going to be more perfected because now we're going to have a central bank, we're going to have central monetary system, we're going to have a central government. Now, the Bretton Woods institutions, we know already, we've talked about them so many times on this channel. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and later the World Trade Organization was added. At the time of the Bretton Woods Agreement, every single colonized African country was still under the grip of colonial rule. You heard that when these systems were being created, when this new world order was being created, we were still colonized. So this is not something that we consented to. This is not something that we were in the deliberations on. We did not get to decide how the IMF was going to look, how the World Bank was going to look, how the United Nations was going to look. We were completely out of those conversations. Only later on did certain puppets who already were puppets many times under the colonists, many times people who were already the favorites of the colonist powers, they were brought into the system while we were still left out. They were brought in and basically they were given, they had to trade off some things. They had to say, okay, you're going to do this in compliance with us and you will get some type of privileges. You will get some money, but you have to make sure that we have access to your resources. Make sure that you're taking these loans. Despite the fact you know you cannot pay back these loans, you have to take these loans. That way we will have legal authority to reorganize your economy, to take control of your economy. This will give us a a complete foot into the door of Africa that we never had before. And this will allow us not to just conquer Africa as one country, but as a unified force, all basically equally distributing our colonial influences inside of Africa. This is what they were offering. This is the vital understanding. The system of neocolonialism. This is vital in understanding the system of neocolonialism. Neocolonialism existed structurally approximately a decade before the era of decolonization began. I want to emphasize that. So if neocolonialism was already in existence before we were free, that means that what we're dealing with today is not progress, people. It's not progress. It's actually a more perfected version of colonialism. And it's one that is more, it's more humane. Because the thing that you'll constantly hear when it comes to human rights, right, is that we're moving into the United Nations. The United Nations was marketed as being about human rights. So they had to basically make this as a way to help people. We're not just going to take over. We're going to help you. We're going to bring you into our world order. We're going to show you how it is that you're going to come along with us on this journey. But we know that's not what they really wanted, because we were absent and rejected from having any power inside of this system. Thank you so much for the contribution. Oh, y'all have to excuse me 1 second. I'm going to just blow my nose so I can speak more clearly, but I'll be right back. Thank y'all for waiting. You actually waited for me. Okay, thank you so much for your contribution, Amul Jaleh. Thank you so much. So I think we can understand. Now, I actually want to read. I want to read from mainstream sources, because I want to be clear. Like, this is not like some crazy conspiracy. Like, you know, again, like, oh my gosh, you're taking over. These are things that are like recognized inside of many international documents, inside of many types of mainstream sources. So I'm going to read from Wikipedia. And if you Google New World Order and you look up Wikipedia, this will come out. I'm just going to read a small section of their actual page. And I pick Wikipedia because if you don't know, if you talk about certain things on YouTube, so for example, anytime like you talk about global warming, COVID, you say something like New World Order, anything like that. Now YouTube does this thing where they put disclaimers up, and essentially they'll say, go to Wikipedia basically for real context, basically like to really know what's going on. So this is even said on Wikipedia. It says, during the 20th century, political figures such as Woodrow Wilson and Winston Churchill used the term New World Order. So as I said in the beginning of the video, I did not create this term. This is something that they actually created to refer to a new period of history characterized by a dramatic change in world political thought and in the global balance of power after World War I and World War II. The interwar and post-World War II period were seen as opportunities to implement idealistic proposals for global governance by collective efforts to address worldwide problems that go beyond the capacity of individual nation states to resolve, while nevertheless respecting the rights of nations to self-determination. So that's a complete lie. It was never about self-determination. If it was about self-determination, then Mali would not have a problem right now. If the New World Order was about self-determination, Mali, the actual country Mali, could say, we do not want this person in power. We're going to put someone else in power, or we're going to be led from this transitional government until we feel like we have a constitution that's representative of us. We want to do things without French influence. That is literally self-determination. They're asking for self-determination. They're demanding it. And that has led to Mali now being sanctioned, and now being threatened by possibly being sanctioned by not only the Ecowas, but the African Union, the European Union, and the United Nations. So this whole idea is complete bull. But what they said before the self-determination part is important to understand, that it's about dissolving the capacity of individual nation states. Now, we know in Africa, we do not respect those colonial borders. Those colonial borders were not created by us or for us. But those colonial borders are what we're told are the countries that we have today. Those countries do not have any type of autonomy inside of the system. They basically have to submit to the system in order to be a part. But again, we have to emphasize, So something that I think a lot of people get wrong when they talk about a new world order, they act like every country is equal. That's not true. It's never been true. It's always been by design. This is a system that was going to be led by the colonists or the West. It's going to be led by the European Union and the United States. This is going to be the people in the UK. These are the people that's going to lead this movement. You have puppets who are allowed to be kind of figureheads, right? Because think about the Security Council. They have permanent members, 5 permanent members of the Security Council. United States, Russia, UK, France, and China. They have non-permanent members of the Security Council. Those people are really just faces, right? They don't have a veto power to be able to veto anything that the United Nations does. No, the people who are non-permanent members do not have a veto power. Only those 5 permanent members. So understand what's happening here. This system was never created to be an equal one. Even among the puppets, they have a hierarchy, okay? Some puppets are more elevated than others. If you haven't noticed, Paul Kagame is loved. And even he does not have the same love as like Saudi Arabia or whatever. Like there's countries, there's a hierarchy to this system. And as you'll see inside of global politics, inside of this system, there are people who are going to sell out the interests of their people in order to basically have some crumbs from the master's table. And that's what African puppet leaders are. They're basically sellouts to this New World Order. And they'll sell out the people, they'll rob you blind. Meanwhile, you are suffering. And you have no autonomy or no decision-making power over your own destinies. This is what they're offering us. This is when the United Nations comes and say, we want to give you human rights. We want to give you human rights, Libya. Think about what happened to Libya. Libya is the perfect example. Sovereign nation, right? Self-determined, the lifestyle, the provisions for the people, healthcare, education, all of that in Libya, and then money that Gaddafi was able to use to actually offer other African countries loans. That was Libya. That was a threat because he's moving on his own. In fact, if you haven't seen it, please do. Go to YouTube or whatever you're on and look up Gaddafi tearing up the United Nations Charter in the United Nations. I mean, I really wish I was more knowledgeable back then. I was a kid when that happened, but oh my gosh, like literally tore up the charter, tore it up in front of them because he said this United Nations is a farce. How can you call yourself the United Nations when you really don't have equal power? The Security Council is really the ones who have the power. Tore up the UN Charter. Powerful statement. When he did that, he was basically determined to be an enemy and he had to be taken out. That's what happens repeatedly over and over in history. Now I'm just going to read a little bit more from this article. Such collective initiatives manifested in the formation of intergovernmental organizations such as the League of Nations. The League of Nations was a prequel to the United Nations. And then in 1945, the United Nations. And the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, along with international regimes such as the Bretton Woods system, we talked about that, the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, implemented to maintain a cooperative balance and facilitate reconciliation between nations to prevent another global conflict. This is something essential because we're going to talk a little bit about China to end this video out because I want us to be a little bit more honest about China because we have to have a real analysis of what's happening inside of the global sphere. So as I said, it's about preventing another World War II. That's what they are, World War III. That's what they tell us it's about. Now, I want you to watch this video in case, again, you think I'm being a conspiracy theorist and you think that I'm just making this stuff up. I'm going to play some of a video that was on the Council of Foreign Relations. They are basically like, think of the behind the scenes controllers of global politics that come out of the United States. So there's different ones, obviously. We have different ones like, again, the World Economic Forum, you have different types of bodies. The CFR, I would say, are the ones that really set the agenda as far as really neocolonialism, if you think about it. So
it was developed in an effort.
Let me go back. So it says, what is the liberal world order? So like I said, because they caught on to the fact that a lot of people were upset at this new world order, they called it the liberal world order as a way to kind of distract from what's happening.
From natural disasters to deadly diseases to wars, the world can be a turbulent, even chaotic place. But around 75 years ago, a new system was imagined to temper this turbulence and improve the lives of many. It is called the liberal world order.
Okay, so you see the idea being painted. The world was in chaos. People were dying. Then we came together and we brought it together in this liberal world order.
It is a liberal system in the sense that it operates on rules that are, in theory, applied to each country equally, and that it encourages each country to be democratic and to open its economy to the rest of the world.
I have to pause right there. They encourage each country to be democratic. What do we keep seeing constantly as being the issue about Mali? They say democracy, democracy. I said I was on Black Power Media. I'm on every Tuesday, and I said then, I'm gonna say now, I am honestly not someone who is pro democracy. I'm pro representation. I'm pro representative governments. Democracy, though, to me, is really a way to hide the fact that they're constantly trying to control our governments. The idea that instead of having a council of elders like we're used to in an African culture that has the interests of the people at heart, instead we're going to give the right to vote to every single person to directly vote for their representatives, and every single person is going to be expected to make the right decision. That sounds good in theory, but what happens in practice is that, first of all, every single person is not able to pay attention to what's going on, particularly inside of places like Africa, where most people are trying to survive. Those who do vote are oftentimes being swayed by impassioned speeches, by people who are being propped up by people outside of the country who have an economic interest in that country. So when you hear them say that the New World Order needs democracy, and then what else did they say? Opening of the international economy. Understand these things are basically how they created what exists today. They need these things in order to rule us. They need open economies. Some of our people have no problem with globalization. I think that's crazy, but some of our people have no problem with it. But having an open economy says that it's open to everyone. It's open to those who have and those who have not. But those who have not are not able to go into your economy. They're trying to keep their economy from falling apart. Clearly, the people who have are going to come into your economy and buy it up. This is what they want, though, for all of us.
It is a global system in that every country around the world is encouraged to join and follow those rules, even if some do not. And it is a system that promotes order in that most countries that buy into it respect the borders of other countries and seek to resolve their differences peacefully.
Unless you're in Africa, where, if you do something to assert your rights, the neighboring country will basically sanction you and basically declare war on you.
It was developed in an effort to avoid repeating the major man-made disasters of the first half of the 20th century, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars. Following World War II, the United States, along with several other countries, started drafting an aspirational blueprint for what later became known as the Liberal World Order.
Again, we were not in on these negotiations. Keep that in mind. Whenever we're talking about the United Nations, we were not in on this.
Establishing certain international institutions. The United Nations was built to promote peace between countries. The World Bank would support global economic development, and the International Monetary Fund and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which later became the World Trade Organization, would support investment and trade between countries. Okay,
so I'm gonna pause this now. Let me put this in the description. I feel like I've been telling you all I'm gonna give you links and I haven't been doing it. Yeah, so I want you to see simply that, number one, like I said, this is not some conspiracy that people have come up with. This is actually something real that we're all battling with constantly, really. And if we're not keeping abreast of what's happening inside of this global system, then we're going to be caught off guard whenever they come in and impose their rule on us whenever we try to call for self-determination. That's all Mali and Guinea, that's all they're asking for. The right to determine our own internal politics. And yet they're being made into an international pariah. So this is something that has been masked, again, repeatedly as being humane. Human rights is something you'll often hear. All of these are ways that the global system masks their agenda. The real agenda is control. And that's what we have to understand. It's global control. Another thing I want to point out is that they said that the New World Order or the Liberal World Order was created as a way to protect against further disasters, another World War II or another economic stock crash. Something that you'll see constantly inside of international politics is the thing that triggers any type of grappling of power by the global elites. It's always an international disaster. For example, September 11th, the War on Terror. What happened? Well, a bunch of us lost our rights. A bunch of people were killed. And this was also a solidifying of this New World Order that had to be used to protect the poor West from the rest of the world, right? Now we have the COVID pandemic. What did we see? What did we say last time? We were talking about how the World Economic Forum has offered this answer. It's the Great Reset. Now we have this big threat, to all of us, our health. So now we have to completely reset the world order. Okay. So always pay attention to international catastrophes, whether it's diseases, whether it's wars, plagues, or whatever it is, because this is what the system does to grapple and grab more power. And if I'll give you another example. If you didn't notice, after January 6th, right, and we're hearing that January 6th was actually set up by the FBI or encouraged by the FBI. So basically, it was all a ploy, like many other things inside of this country. I'm not going to list everything, but January 6th, essentially, they finding that there was a lot of FBI agents who were actually the ones among the protesters or whatever, saying we have to go into the Capitol, right? Google it if you haven't seen it in any of the news reports. What happened after, if you don't know, is that a lot of laws were created after January 6th that basically not only affect the Trump people, affect all of us. So, for example, there was actually a Black Lives Matter protester who was convicted under one of their laws for something of the nature of some type of radical activity. Now, this is important to emphasize because a lot of times we'll have these people who the media will say, oh, like everyone jumped on this. CNN constantly. We have to protect against the white supremacists. We have to protect against the white supremacists. What they didn't tell us is at the same time, they were creating laws. It wasn't about the white supremacists. It was about everyone who was a dissent to the system. So there were laws that were created while we were also distracted and, also horrified by January 6th. Laws that were created that were going to affect us whenever we stand up against the system, the same that it affected the white supremacists. So whenever these big events happen, it's a way to consolidate power. It's a way to ensure that the state that wants to exercise and take more liberties as far as everyday citizens, the state has that right now because, oh my gosh, we have to stop another January 6th. So we have to tap out your cell phones. We have to get into your accounts. We have to do all these things to monitor you. We have to stop another pandemic. So therefore we have to know, everyone has to know your healthcare information. We have to all find ways to have that information. People are creating apps or whatever. Someone even created a chip to hold the information about whether you're vaccinated or not. So we have to understand the thwarting of rights, your individual rights, is what comes about whenever a major catastrophe happens inside of the world. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about in regard to what's happening right now is China's role in the New World Order. So if you don't know, right now, the World Economic Forum is meeting. They, I believe they started yesterday or the day before. They did not do their in-person meeting because of COVID. That's what they said. They're pushing off their in-person meeting to the summer. The person who started the World Economic Forum's was basically the initial speaker, the big speaker, right? Was the leader of China. He was the one that was going to lead off the talks inside the World Economic Forum. So let me be very clear. I've said this many times on this channel, and I want to just emphasize it now. No, I do not believe that China, when it comes to Africa, is the same as the United States assassinating different leaders, and at least as far as what we know, like we don't know what happens behind the closing, but they're not the same as far as trying to reorganize the economy, like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Okay, they're not the same. Russia is similar. You don't see them trying to necessarily redesign an economy or, take control of everything the same way that the West does. That does not mean that we let our guard down. That's an issue that I have with a lot of my brothers and sisters that are like on the left. Like, don't let your guard down because of that. Because when you have the World Economic Forum using China as like the main attraction, and despite the fact that the United States and China are at war with each, or not war, they're like at a war of words right now, they're showing favor to China. Now, what I want us to understand was that when it comes to the New World Order, what's happening right now with China and the United States, it's not going to be a war. in my opinion. I don't think there's going to be a war. This is basically two major global powers who are trying to fight to basically be the one that's going to lead the world order. So you have China trying to push, and China is closely allied with Russia. Then you have the United States that is coupled with the European Union. And so you have these two major global powers. Who's going to be the one to set the tone? Now, the World Economic Forum, in that video I showed you last time I did a video, they have said, okay, let's have a multi-party system. Let's not just have the United States being the leader of the world order. Let's not just have China being the world leader. Let's have multiple leaders, kind of like the Security Council. So let's have all of them basically working collaboratively. Now, my issue is that we kind of ignore the fact. First of all, I want to emphasize China is not on par as being an ally to African liberation. Now, again, they're not the United States trying to take over and reorganize our economies necessarily, although they've done many firms have done many shady deals in Africa still. You know, we shouldn't ignore those. But they are complicit with the neo-colonial system. They have no problem working with Paul Kagame. They have no problem working with all of the oppressive countries. They have no problem working with Paul Biya. They have no problem working with Joseph Kabila and now Felix Tshisekedi. They have no problem working with a lot of these leaders that we are outwardly against. They have no problem with Museveni. Like, they have no problem with these people. So as opposed to a Cuba, right? When Fidel Castro was in power, you've seen him walking arm in arm with the Mandela. You've seen him working arm in arm with Sankara or Samora Machel. You see him working with liberation governments. China is working with anyone. They don't care. Like, they know what neocolonialism is. Don't think they're stupid. They know what's happening in the African continent. They know that the people are suffering. They know that these leaders are not really representative of the people. They know these things. They themselves have come out of neocolonialism. They themselves have been have had a revolution and overcome their colonists. So they understand very well what Africa's dealing with, but they still choose to work with African leaders, make deals that they know are not going to go to the people because of they understand the nature of neocolonialism. So I'm saying that to say, yes, we recognize what Trevor Noah said was wrong. China is not the worst, is not the biggest colonist, right? But they're not clean. You know, we can't romanticize this relationship. I understand why some of us want to romanticize the relationship is because we understand that in a situation like what Mali is going through, Mali is now being completely isolated by the world. The power that is essentially coming to the rescue right now is Russia, because otherwise the people could easily starve out, right? And we understand that whenever the United States and Europe say, no, we're going to punish you, we need some type of way for the people to survive that. Ethiopia right now, allied with China and Russia. What would Ethiopia, would the Ethiopian government be standing right now if it wasn't for that allyship? I don't know. So I understand why we have to understand that these are different types of relationships, but it doesn't mean that we forget or we overlook, you know, things that are being done that are hurtful to the African continent and African people. We should always idealize not having to rely on Russia or China or anyone. We should idealize having self-reliance, right? Africa has the most resources and it's going to have the most people very soon. We're going to have the most people and the most resources. Why is it that the people and the resources cannot build infrastructure, albeit slowly? You know, we can't just have this idea that it's going to happen overnight. But if you understand what China did, they did it slowly. And they got their power slowly. Why is it that we can't do the same thing? So that's what we should be looking to, not trying to rely on these other powers that have their own agendas and are willing to work in complicit relationships with the neocolonial government. So to clear that up, I want to just play a video to help you understand. When I say that right now, it's not necessarily the United States and China at war right now. It's basically they're at war with who's going to control the New World Order. I want to just play a bit of a video of all of your favorite politician, Hillary Clinton, I'm sure, right? And also another guy. They're talking about China and the New World Order. I want you to hear it out the horse's mouth.
Thank you very much, all. Fascinating topic, in many ways, culmination not just of this conference, but also of
go forward a little bit
over the course of the last few weeks. we've seen at least a pullback from the idea of a new Cold War. Do you think anything fundamental has changed or is changing between the United States and China?
So, by the way, this is Tony Blair. Tony Blair, the same Tony Blair that's advising Samia Suluhu in Tanzania, but most famously known as Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of England, who orchestrated, along with Hillary Clinton, so it's funny that they're here together, the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi.
I think the fundamental answer is fundamentally no. But I do think what the West is trying to search for is the right relationship with China, which, as you say, will be the defining relationship, certainly of this part of the 21st century, in circumstances where people acknowledge that China is a power, has a rightful place as a power. They understand that, for example, on issues like climate change, there isn't a solution without the engagement of China. But at the same time, there is anxiety about China as a threat.
So a question would be, why is China a threat? Because as opposed to Western countries, we've not seen China invade another country yet. So you have the people who are most infamous for invading other countries, the European Union, again, the United States. They're saying that China has a right to exist, something that we don't have, right? So good for China. They have a right to be a world power. That's something that Africa doesn't have a right to. So, hey, go China. But they don't have, the issue with them is that they're a threat with having not invaded any country in recent history. So that tells you a little bit of what their mindset is.
And therefore, I would characterize what I think the West is searching for, and I don't think this is defined very clearly yet, but I would characterize it as one that will come eventually to maximum engagement, but with superior strength. In other words,
I know this is crazy because he's literally said maximum engagement with superior strength. Look, listen to what he says next.
In other words, that people will understand that you have to engage with China, whether it's on climate or pandemics or the stability of the global economy, but at the same time, recognizing that China has taken a different path in the last few years. It's become more internally repressive, more externally aggressive. I think the West will want to retain superiority.
Like, it's like so funny when you hear these people talk because they don't even care about how colonial they sound, right? So he literally says, and that's what I told you at the beginning, like the world order is not like an equal thing. Like it's not this idea that we're all here equally and we're all a part of the world. Some people think it's this thing where we're going to have socialism in all the world, like the like a communist revolution. No, that's not what it is. You have a hierarchy. And he literally said out of his mouth, Tony Blair, that China can be a world power, but we have to be superior. And doesn't feel racist saying that because this is what these people are used to. Let me see if I can forward to Hillary Clinton.
A big part of what the Biden administration is attempting to lay out. We've seen that in recent months with the move to bring together the Quad and try to create, a very visible alliance of democratic nations in the region.
If you don't know what she's talking about when she says bring together the Quad, if you don't recall, earlier this year, there was a meeting as far as the G7 and also NATO. And I think the G20 met after the G7. And the big thing they talked about, China. And they made it seem like China is a military threat. I don't think China's a military threat to the West. I think it's a threat to their dominance in the order. So their solution was to offer all this money to Africa. We're going to be the one to fund your loans. Like they have anxiety basically about losing their place as the dominant power inside of the order. So basically, yes, it was like last year, actually, I forgot, it's a new year. But yes, there was the NATO meeting and a G7 meeting. Look back if you have time and see like what was talked about at that meeting pertaining to China and Africa, because these are important things to understand.
To be part of an overall effort to make clear to China that, of course, we have to cooperate. We should cooperate on a range of issues, but we also cannot permit the kind of aggressive military buildup, the kind of efforts to dominate maritime navigation, the intimidation of nations in the larger Asia-Pacific region. And we also have seen a very serious and important defense move by the United States, the UK, and Australia to buttress Australia as.
So you see right here, and I think we can end off here. Essentially, China having, and to me, the big thing that you have to be in a New World Order is you have to have military might, because you have to be able to keep others from striking you first. And that's what China has. Here's the link, though, if anyone wants to watch the full interview. So I just want to emphasize this. China, as I said, they were the ones to start off the World Economic Forum. They were the ones that have a big speech to allow other globalists to come in. And basically, if you see what the World Economic Forum is talking about now, they're all like kissing up to China because they understand that they can't fight it. So what we're going to do is not fight it. We're going to try to mesh, and we're going to try to create a multi-tiered world order, where the United States and China are the leaders, and then you have these other countries such as the European Union or NATO countries, and Russia also, who can basically be like the second tier. And then way down there is Africa. That's what they're offering us. So, y'all, I'm not going to kill this too long. I do have to log in to do some work, but I do just want to give you an idea of why it is that Mali's being punished. And I hope I kind of got you to understand a little bit more of it. It's because Mali has fallen out of compliance with the New World Order, the Liberal World Order, whatever world order you want to call it. It's one world order. Mali has fallen out of compliance. They don't have a democracy. That's one thing that they have to have. They're not liberalizing their economies. That's one thing you have to have. And they're not taking orders from one of the stooges of the United States, that is France. They're not taking orders anymore, and they're not taking orders from the United States. That is why they're being punished, and that is why they're being punished by their own brothers and sisters inside of West Africa. I encourage you all to continue to follow this story, continue to support the people of Mali, continue to stand with them, because it's only going to get tougher. If they stick to their principles, it will only get tougher. If they stick to what's right, it will only get tougher. Because as we know, over time, the globalists have mastered the art of manipulation. They've mastered the art of war. They've mastered the art of coups. They've mastered the art of infiltrations. They've mastered so many things over time. So I hope that you are definitely keeping prayers for the people of Mali, and just really staying with them and sticking with them. Before I do log out, I just want to also remind all of you that WCC's convention, Pan-African Unity or Perish, a call for the colonization of neocolonialism. The link to register for that is in the chat. The cost is now $35 if you are coming out of the global north, so United States or Europe, and it's also $25 if you're coming out of the global south, so to speak, so Africa, the African Caribbean, any of those places. So that's what we are pushing for, along with AUMD. Also, you'll catch the podcast and book club. Also, by the way, I'm gonna do a more formal announcement, but we have as I said in the podcast, a sweepstakes coming up. If you're an organizer and you want to get a little cash for your organizational work, we're giving away $500 to an organization or organizer for the purpose of starting a project or furthering a project that you already have. The theme is Africans Return to the Soil, meaning growing food. So whether it's you have a community garden, and this is, by the way, international. So if you're in the African continent, you could also apply. It could be a community garden. It could be a food pantry. The idea is food sustainability. That's what we're trying to encourage. So WeChargeColonialism.org. And if you go to the Black Power Fund, that's what this new initiative is, you will see the sweepstakes, and the cost is $10 to enter. And that entire $10 that you use to enter into the contest will go to the same fund. So it will also go to helping another organizer in the future. So that's all I have, everyone. I thank you for sticking with me, even though I have a cold. Hopefully next week I'll be completely better so I can speak so clear. But thank you all. I hope you have a blessed day, and I will see you on the next broadcast.